And welcome to Straight Up with Mark Petroni. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. While they're not giving up their property without a fight, frustrated residents in Richmond, British Columbia, met for a public meeting last night. They're worried and angry about the possibility of having land they thought was theirs taken away. A recent court ruling granted title to a portion of land along the Fraser River to an Aboriginal band, the Cowichan. Now, that ruling is still subject to an appeal, so nothing is confirmed, but residents are understandably worried. One property owner says he's been living in his home since 1975, and now his lender won't renew his mortgage.
I've owned my land for more than enough years to know it's mine. I'm not giving it up without a fight. I paid tax, I bought the place. Now, lo and behold, I don't own my place. Not fair.
Now, residents say that the value of their homes has declined since this whole controversy began, the judge's ruling, and they want to be compensated by the city, saying nobody warned them there was a title issue until after the ruling came down. Now comes word that a First Nations group in Quebec has filed a lawsuit demanding Aboriginal title over lands in Western Quebec. So is your property next? Don't expect any miraculous trade news from South Korea between the Canadian and American trade delegations at the Asia-Pacific Economic Summit. Despite some pleasantries over dinner between Trump and Carney, the president made it clear he's not in South Korea to talk to Carney. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, "For those asking, we didn't come to South Korea to see Canada." President Trump broke off trade talks with Canada over a TV network ad featuring the voice of Ronald Reagan criticizing the use of tariffs. Carney would not confirm or deny seeing the ad ahead of time, but Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, insists the Prime Minister was well aware of it.
Back to the Reagan ad, how do you know the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff saw this particular ad before you moved ahead with airing it?
I was with them.
Did they express concern when you were with them?
I'm not going to talk about our private conversation at all. I told them that we're running it. I'm going to cut it off on Monday, and that's it. I think it was it was the right thing to do. It stirred a conversation like I've never seen before.
Ford also wants an apology from the U.S. ambassador to Canada for cursing out Ontario's trade representative, David Peterson.
Ambassador Hoekstra, to use a blunt phrase, cursing out your Ontario representative in the United States at a meeting. What do you say to that? This was related to your advertisement related to Donald Reagan. Yeah. What's your response to Ambassador Hoekstra's words?
Pete, you got to call Dave up and apologize. It's simple. You know, the cheese slipped off the cracker. I get it. You're ticked off. But call the guy up. But just call the guy up and bury the hatchet. Call the guy up and apologize. Let's start getting back on track. I'm not telling him. I'm suggesting that, you know, you get hot-headed one day, call Dave up and say, I apologize. Sorry, got a little heated. So, you know, that, as simple as that. People get in disagreements. It's unbecoming of an ambassador. Never heard of this in my entire life.
He's referring to David Patterson there, the trade rep. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra also said that the deal was almost done, and all but there, until the ads came out and ruined everything. Independent journalist Wyatt Claypool joins us from Victoria. Wyatt, in a way, this whole ad controversy has kind of been a handy distraction for Mark Carney, because since he got to Asia, there's been really no announcements about any trade developments at all. Meantime, Donald Trump has made several announcements as far as trade goes.
Well, and now we have also David Eby giving Mark Carney even more cover for having failed on making not only a trade agreement with the U.S., but making substantial trade agreements anywhere else. We're replaying what happened in Europe, but now we're doing it in Asia. Mark Carney shows up, signs some very vague agreements about how we should cooperate more, and that's it. Whereas Donald Trump is signing agreements where countries are guaranteeing to buy certain amounts of American goods, and they're eating our lunch at the same time we're pretending our trade agreements are going to mean anything. In fact, these countries aren't going to have any money to buy Canadian goods. after having done all of the after having signed these agreements with Donald Trump.
I find it also amazing that people are viewing every single gesture coming out of South Korea involving Mark Carney and Trump as some kind of seismic thing that we should all be talking about. Here's Trump acknowledging Carney, but then later on they just passed without acknowledging each other or saying hello. It's like people are watching this thing so very closely. It's a little bit amusing.
I was watching some of the mainstream media coverage and reading some articles this morning. They make it sound like there was like substantial gains for Canada in Carney just sitting down at a dinner where Donald Trump was also present. I suppose they talked a little bit as if Trump was going to stand up and slap him across the face. It was there's nothing we didn't gain anything by them sitting in a room together and not fighting. And then I think the real story of how this whole tour has gone for Mark Carney is Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, "I came to South Korea not to talk to Canada," because truly he's not there to talk to us. And if anything, we seem like a small scared puppy following him around looking for a trade deal. At the same time, Mark Carney keeps pulling this thing, who needs the quickie mart? Not me. And then he goes and tries to sign a deal in Asia, and the entire time is concerned with what Donald Trump thinks.
And then there's the whole fuzzy situation around who knew what when in terms of this ad, where you've got the questions being posed to Mark Carney, did you see the ads ahead of time? He didn't really answer, didn't want to go there. Then you've got Ford saying, well, he was with me at the time, so he most certainly saw the ads. I mean, this is silliness. It's
Yeah.
absolute silliness. Go ahead.
It would have been the most well-kept secret on the planet if Doug Ford's PC government was able to put out this ad without Mark Carney knowing about it. The capital is in the same province as Ontario, and somehow nobody in the Ontario government had let them know that this ad was going to go out. And even now, we have Premier Doug Ford saying that Mark Carney already knew about it and didn't stop him. And I think maybe it's Carney was being smart and thinking that, hey, if Ford screws this up, I was already not going to get a trade deal signed, but now Ford can take it on the chin as being the reason for why this all happened. And he can be the controversy, and I can kind of sit over here pretending I'm accomplishing anything.
Meantime, Ford is spiking the football over these ads, which led directly to torpedoing of a deal that was apparently imminent. I mean, I guess he just thinks it's fantastic. He says, well, Americans weren't really aware of the issue, but they're aware of it now, so therefore we won. Does that justify having imploding, this deal that was on the table? I mean, according to Pete Hextra, this was a done deal.
Well, and now this morning we have Doug Ford posturing yet again and demanding an apology for one of the trade envoys from Ontario being yelled at by either the ambassador or somebody else. It really doesn't matter. It's a nothing burger of a story, but now we're trying to pretend, hey, we also have things to be offended by. And sometimes people end up getting bogged down in the narrative, going back to the substance of the ad that Ford was running. Well, was he right about what Reagan thought about tariffs? It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. This entire trade dispute has had this annoying kind of chattering going on in like the media and on social media of, well, are the Americans wrong for what they're doing? Well, that really doesn't matter. What are we going to do to get to a real trade deal? And this is why we've not gotten to a trade deal. People don't really know this like commonly right now. It's not like it's a hidden fact, but Mark Carney has been drawing lines around issues that Dominic LeBlanc and Melanie Jolie, as our trade representatives, are not allowed to talk about. So when you're not allowed to talk about Canadian media laws, when you're not allowed to talk about supply management, other duties that we have, other regulations that they want gone, how are you going to sign a deal? Because we don't have any demands we can really make because we are not willing to give any concessions. We have no ability to make any threats. And we sort of sit there wondering if they're just going to let us off the hook. And should they? From like, I don't know, a moral perspective or something, doesn't really matter. It's happening, and we're basically whining about the fact things are happening.
Yeah, and the idea that Ford thinks, well, the deal that was on the table apparently didn't include autos. It was really all about steel, aluminum, and energy, which is fine. That would have provided relief had that deal have been announced and signed. That would have provided relief for those three sectors. But in Doug Ford's world, hey, it didn't include autos, so screw that. Well, let's upend the chessboard and start from scratch. Meantime, they've spent, I don't know, 75 million. He says it wasn't that much, but still, it is an extraordinary amount of money. And who knows how long it'll take for us to get trade talks back on the rails, Wyatt.
And this is the same thing that Premier David Eby is doing in British Columbia, that they are using the tariff situation as an excuse for why the auto industry in Ontario and the softwood lumber industry in British Columbia are collapsing. They were collapsing long before any of the trade issues started, but now they're acting as if the tariffs are what's hurting the auto industry. Oh, the tariffs are what's hurting the softwood lumber industry. I was I was just messaged by somebody who works at a Port Alberni sawmill yesterday saying that they still import American fiber because it's so restrictive. The industry is so restrictive in BC that you can't cut down enough trees to even meet your fiber needs, even though it is an entire province of trees. They could easily do it, but they still, in the middle of this trade dispute, import American fiber because of just how much the NDP government locally has hamstrung the industry.
Yeah, I just don't know if Ford and others really understand the dynamic of our relationship with the United States. I mean, clearly we need a deal much more than they need one. And so, I mean, that immediately is going to put you behind the eight ball. We want access to their 340 million people. You know, they're a huge market over there. They don't really have to have, I mean, they appreciate it. They like it. They certainly sell stuff up here, but that accounts for about 12% of their economy, their total exports. You know, we're 12%. Meantime, they are 70% of ours. So that dynamic alone should suggest that the sense of urgency should be on our side in terms of getting a deal with the Americans. Because as you heard Trump say, I can live with what we have. You know, I mean, can we say the same thing? No, we can't.
And the biggest lie of the past year was Mark Carney running in the general election as the guy who knows how to negotiate with a man like Donald Trump. He clearly doesn't, because he doesn't understand the value of trying to get to a win-win agreement. He just thinks like, "Oh, Trump plays hardball, so I'm going to play hardball too." It's like, "No, you are negotiating with a country with more economic power than you. You need to kind of generate a rhetorical win-win for you both so that Trump feels happy with whatever you get." You could actually make Canada better off in this situation. But the thing is that the elbows up rhetoric, the way that the Liberals pitch themselves in the election, has basically precluded them from actually coming to a win-win that would actually get Trump on board, that would actually get a better deal for Canada, because we're trying to pitch this as we're just trying to get the best deal for Canada. Screw the Americans. I know we could have basically softened supply management, maybe cleaned up some of our media laws, and then invited the Americans along to get to a zero tariff situation where how about we gang up on China? You need Canada to basically help you like fight back against China. Except that at the same time we're negotiating and failing to get to an agreement with the Americans, we're actually being far nicer to the Chinese who also have tariffs on us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just ask our canola farmers. I've got to ask you about the situation in Richmond, British Columbia. And Juno News covered this. We were there. Obviously, residents there in South Richmond, I guess, are quite concerned, understandably so, after this judge's ruling, basically allocating a portion of property along the Fraser River to this band, the Cowichan. And people are saying, well, that sucks. I mean, I've lived here since 1975 or whatever. Some of those people actually still have mortgages. And the lenders are saying, you know what, we can't renew your mortgage because of this. We're seeing property values diminished as a result of all this uncertainty. This is not a good situation. And then add to that, now we've got a band out in Quebec saying that there's portions of land in Western. You knew this was going to happen, right? As soon as this stuff hit in Richmond, other bands, and I don't blame them, are looking across the country and say, yeah, me too.
Well, and what you also have going on is the secret deals behind the scenes as well. The Cowichan sued because it was, frankly, a ridiculous ask that you were going to have Aboriginal title recognized over an already built up urban center. But there's been tons of other deals in British Columbia, and this is where the government, the NDP government, just has no leg to stand on. They've been happily signing away land elsewhere. They signed over Haida Gwaii, the Queen Charlotte Islands, 100% to the Haida ban, to the point where people had their houses bulldozed by basically the band council, and they couldn't do anything about it because it's now the band's land. And the thing is about all this is that's kind of gross because it's always these lawyers and consultants and band council activists pretending they're doing this because we need to help the individual First Nations person, even though this is actually not helping any of them at all because they don't own anything. Because on Aboriginal title land, they can't own private property just like anyone else can own private property. These act like mini Soviet states within British Columbia, and this can absolutely happen elsewhere in Canada. And remember, just in BC alone, I think there's over 150 bands who would be eligible to also pursuing similar lawsuits. You could have this happening endlessly. The Cowichan could do this again on other parts of Vancouver Island or along parts of the mainland where they could just simply, frankly, make up that we used to have an area around here that could have been a fishing village or whatever, and now we want it back. You cannot have law being based on oral testimony of what you owned and what you didn't own, where you are supposed to be the end all be all in terms of the authority over who owned what.
And you would think that some of these judges would count for that. I mean, I understand that they've got to base it on law and what's on the books and all that, but considering the amazing amount of upheaval that a decision like that brings about, did they factor that in? I'm thinking probably not.
Well, and this is there's a legal idea of reasonableness, and this has been completely unreasonable. The idea that you're going to argue that well over 100 years ago, this could have been a fishing village, and that's why you now need to own the dirt out under everyone's house in Richmond is quite the thing. And yes, now actually the Cowichan, they already got a portion of the land given to them and transferred over to Aboriginal title that the government's appealing. But the Cowichan themselves are appealing and saying that no, 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 we actually own everything in this green drawn lined area. Because if you ever see the map, there'll be a small little area, not exactly small, considering a lot of people's homes are there, but a smaller area that the courts had ruled are under Cowichan Aboriginal title. But then they just want basically the rest of it as well. And unless you actually legally extinguish Aboriginal title in this area, it's not going to go away. And this is also bringing up a lot of controversy, rightfully so, that maybe we need to actually either completely get rid of or modify Section 35 of the Constitution, because that and laws like UNDRIP or DRIPA in British Columbia are effectively making it so that, yes, while many of these judges seem like activists, technically, is this legally sound? Well, maybe based on the really stupid laws that our provincial governments have on the books as well as the Constitution.
How much of this is about land acknowledgements? I mean, did that play a role? We've had years of this sort of thing now, this kind of woke sense of, we are here on the traditional lands of the so-and-so band. Is that what started it and got people thinking and got these bands, thinking, well, if you're acknowledging that it's our land, then maybe you should give it back. From there, one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, it's in the courts and they get a decision in their favor.
These things actually have been going on since the 80s. There is a notorious law firm, I'm not going to name them, but in British Columbia, they've been helping do these lawsuits since 1989. So this predated the land acknowledgement kind of craze that's gone on over the last decade or so. The problem, though, with the land acknowledgements is that it obviously is a sort of way of grooming people into not fighting back. The idea is that we every single day repeat the mantra that we don't really own any of this and it's unceded, and even though it's the wilderness when you show up in British Columbia as settlers back in the day, it's kind of ridiculous that now 200 years later we're going to be saying that no, actually you needed to sign something for that land that frankly nobody was using. Does there need to be cutouts? Does there need to be cooperation with First Nations people in certain instances? Definitely. But the whole idea that we're effectively in a state where 115% of the entire province could be owned by a First Nations band is kind of silly. That's not how land ownership has worked anywhere else in history at any other time. And the land acknowledgements are something that needs to be ended. Even in Richmond, the mayor of Richmond, Mayor Brody, even had to say that we can't do land acknowledgements while this case is proceeding because we're now in a legal situation, and I cannot repeat something saying that this isn't ours because it absolutely is. People paid money for the land that their house occupies. It's fee simple title. They paid for it. It's theirs. We're not going to be repeating anything that undermines that right anymore.
And if it comes down to compensation, either to the band or possibly landowners, because many of the property owners in South Richmond are saying, well, if we're going to lose title to our property, we want to be compensated. We want the city to compensate, or maybe the province. I mean, once you start factoring that across the country, you're into the tens of, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars, considering how much territory, how much property we're talking about, especially all that expensive property in places like Vancouver and Toronto.
And there has to be, even in the current legal framework, there has to be a just reasonable statute of limitations. You can't wait until things have been heavily built up and now the property has a lot of value, and now you're going to be challenging it based on there being no agreement for you to point back to that was violated. The whole point is that they even admit, well, it's unceded. Well, it wasn't ever ceded by the original group in the first place. They're just a story that they used to potentially want to use it. That doesn't then equal that you have legal rights to it, or else we would own a lot of things by simply having existed around it long enough. It's just legally not it's not sustainable, and it's very, I think, telling that this is now happening in large urban centers where they know that the local governments have a lot of money that they could potentially bill out if the band council is able to win the lawsuit. Because again, this has nothing to do with the average First Nations person. This is band council officials, it's consultants, and it's lawyers. That is it. It has nothing to do with the average person who, in many First Nations communities, are still living in poverty because you can't create wealth on First Nations land because it's not owned by anybody but the band council. Again, they're mini Soviet states. If you wanted to start a sawmill, if you wanted to start a mine, if you want to start a small business as a First Nations person, band council can veto it because it's not yours, and they can tell you that you're not allowed to do it because you're effectively a ward of the state if you're a First Nations person on reserved land.
And what implications are there for the resource sector? You want to build Northern Gateway 2.0 or whatever out to the coast. You're dealing with bands. I mean, my understanding is when that project was being discussed, a lot of the bands were absolutely on side with it.
Well, remember what's happened with the wetsuit wetting is then suddenly we found the hereditary chiefs to try and kill the project because all this is legal horseshoes at the end of the day anyways. Even if you get the band on side, activists can always basically nominate people to pretend as if they actually have the real authority around here, which is truly the most racist thing I've ever seen in my life. That you're trying to build a pipeline, and the band council, who can be obstructive at times, even they said yes, but suddenly we found the real king of the land to come out and say no to it. It would be like, it's like if you're trying to build some sort of piece of property in Norway, and then somebody, after the local council approves it, someone throws on a horned helmet and says, actually, I happen to be the patriarch of this area and you're no longer allowed to build.
Yeah, this is Viking land. Get off. Wyatt, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Wyatt Claypool. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.